Today on Proud Product Peeps, I couldn't be happier than to have Mark Demeny on the show today. Mark is a tech analyst for Mock Alliance. It's 20 plus years, not to date him, but 20 plus years in CMS, DXP world. He's been a vendor, been a product manager, a lot of time focused on strategy, dabbles in everything. He's a handyman, an outdoorsman who skis and does other things in the snow in Canada. And he is a tremendous Lego nerd, as you can see in the background. Welcome to the show, Mark.
What makes you proud? Stay positive when the wind is in your face. Treating people with respect, treating people with dignity. Be proud of what you've done.
Thank you. Great intro. It was even stuff that I didn't put in the bio. You've remembered.
Yes. The handyman part was, I recall you rebuilding a pier or a dock for your in-laws up at their cabin. And I remember you showing me the before, during, and after, and how your hands were so bloodied. And but you got through it, and that was kind of cool, I think, because I am not handy at all. So when I see people doing stuff like that, I'm impressed.
Yeah, I find it's nice to get away from the computer screen every once in a while and go and build stuff. So it's a good outlet. Yeah, that was a fun task. They had a big dock that was big and heavy, and I was basically taking it apart and reassembling it to be modular so that we could put it in and out ourselves rather than relying on like a crew of 4 people to do it. So yeah, fun job.
Now, your time with Mock Alliance, you had to include modular as one of the...
Yes, the dock is now modular and composable.
That's right. For winter time, you could kind of retract it a little bit. Yes. So I mentioned you live in Canada. You live in Quebec. It's so beautiful up there. I know sometimes you just, in late afternoon, you just go skiing at the local hill, snowshoe probably, and other things like that. But you're also a world traveler. I know you just got back from Europe, from Copenhagen, I think, and from London. But I think what's most impressed me is that you were actually able to live for a little while in London and a separate time in Vancouver. As someone who probably, that's my only regret, is that didn't get to spend time living in another country with my family. Talk a little bit about that. Like, how did that happen? Like, what was the experience? Super curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, in both cases, it was work initiated. And certainly the London trip was the biggest one. I was in my early 20s and I was working for a company called Watchfire, which has a very interesting side history and story that would be a whole other podcast. But long story short, it was a Canadian company. They were expanding to the UK. They had a bit of a presence there. I'd been there a couple times to do some consulting, and I enjoyed it. And then they said, yeah, we want to have an implementation consultant and sales engineer there. Do you want to do it? And I said, sure. So, I moved out, and initially the office was in the burbs. And then we got some new sales leadership and a few other folks, and they had some contacts for office space right downtown. And so I moved right downtown, and it was an incredible opportunity. I love being in London. I love the UK. It's one of those cities that, obviously it was home for a few years, and it's nice to go back and navigate around as if I'm a local. I not to make you regret it, but I think it is one of those things that really is a defining thing to do. And if you can do it, and you're in the position that a company wants to send you somewhere, and you're young and want some world experience, go and do it. Because it was a lot of fun, and not just living in London, but also from London selling into the continent as well, and just to see like the massive cultural differences. And I know the world is kind of getting smaller, and the last few times I've gone over, I've sort of joked like there's nothing that I can buy in London to bring back home to my wife that I can't just buy here. So in that way, the world is smaller. But in the other way, there are significant cultural differences in terms of how people work and behave, and how they think about work, how they process information, how they make decisions, and that was always very fascinating to me.
So I know you said there isn't very much that you could buy and bring back. There's two things that from my trips that one is Fortnum and Mason tea going into the store on Piccadilly, I think. Like
Yeah.
there's a much broader selection and it's cheaper than ordering on Amazon. But the thing that my family wants me to get every single time are gummy bears. And because over in Europe, they make them with real sugar
Yes.
here and they taste considerably different. And so I get the big, 1 pound or whatever bags. Those are two things. But I agree, like you could pretty much get almost anything on Amazon or anything like that. When you go back now, though, I've been there a ton of times. My family has actually been over a ton of times, but I still feel like I'm mostly tourist and do, relative similar things, try to, branch out and do other things. But when you go back, what is the non-tourist thing that you tend to do?
I mean, it's going to sound touristy, but to me, it was non-touristy. I like to go back to the galleries. The Tate Modern is. I love visiting art museums when I travel, and obviously, every time I go back, there's a different exhibit.
Hmm.
The Tate Modern itself has a whole new wing, so that was pretty fantastic to see. And yeah, I like to do that. And then there's a few areas that I just like to hang out in. London, like New York, is you have all these areas and these different boroughs, and so within that, it's just nice to go and hang out and do a little bit of shopping. Again, even if it is the same stuff that you can get at home, the experience is a little different. So
Yeah.
um,
I
yeah.
find myself going to London, like especially London, because I've been there probably more than any other place in the world. Being able to navigate without your phone
Mhm.
and being able to just generally get lost, but still kind of know where you are to be able to recover and just explore that way. We are not a family of museums. We are very impatient. But we do like to explore and just kind of find like, different nook and crannies and, all that. So, but for somebody that lived there for a short period of time, it is always interesting to hear that. And then Vancouver, what was the Vancouver experience?
Same sort of thing. So after I'd moved back to Canada after working for Watchfire, I was out on the West Coast and I had done a contract with Microsoft for I think about 3 months, and really enjoyed the West Coast. And one of the next consulting engagements that I had was in Vancouver, and that was back when Watchfire was doing content management system integrations, and they had Watchfire, they had Interwoven TeamSite. I knew TeamSite, I was certified on it, and at the time it was still a fairly rare skill set. And I enjoyed working with the team, and I said, I sort of hinted, hey, I'd like to maybe move out here, and they're like, come work for us. So that was very easy as well. So I went out, and that was working for Business Objects, and I ended up being the web development lead there, doing a lot of work with other systems, implementing Alfresco, and then SAP bought Business Objects, so there's a lot of migration of lead generating forms and CRM and what we were doing for analytics. And so that was a really good opportunity that kind of transitioned me into DXP type stuff. Um, but yeah, and that's actually what got me to Sitecore in the end as well. We were looking at other systems to replace TeamSite because, again, this is dating myself. TeamSite is a few generations old now. And Sitecore and Optimizely and others were the shiny new things. So we were looking at that. And then SAP bought us, and I liked working with Sitecore, and basically through the team that I was working with through the sales process said, hey, I'd like to work for you. And they said same thing, like, hey, yeah, come on over. So ended up spending 8 years there.
Oh,
Um,
wow. That was a little longer than I had expected. I'd never actually been to Vancouver. Keep trying
yeah.
to get it on the list. And, ideally going into, a couple hours in to go skiing, some of those great places. But yeah, that sounds awesome. You've had a lot of experience with CMSs and everything. But did you ever have the pleasure of working with Front Page?
I did.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. When I worked for Industry Canada, before Watchfire. So yeah, I mean, if you call that a CMS, then I can add 5 years to the 20-year chunk that I said earlier. Um, but yeah, that would be a very broad definition of management. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
work with.
I didn't have any web experience or whatever. Just after college, I was working in a retail store in Connecticut, and during the downtimes, I created a website using Front Page to just provide other ways for customers to be able to look. We didn't have any commerce or anything like that, but I mean, I spent every day, all day, when I wasn't helping customers building it. We ended up getting funding as a result and built a commerce site. But I agree, it's not really a CMS equivalently, but that's kind of where I learned the craft of building websites in many ways. And it was I remember many times where it would just on the dial-up modem not publish, and then literally like crash everything, and I probably rebuilt 10 different times.
Yeah, it was interesting times, and another one related to that was Dreamweaver.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
was kind of like, oh, the next fancy thing, after Front Page. But yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing for all of us of a certain age is having grown up through that, like getting to HTML and like using text only browsers like Lynx before visual browsers were pretty common, and going on dial up connections, and you could sort of learn as the technology got better and better. So it was like, right, start with dial up and HTML, and then add CSS on top, and then add
Yep.
JavaScript on top, and then add frameworks on top. I mean, I don't envy anybody getting started today, because there's just so many levels of abstraction, and you might say like, oh yeah, I'm going to start learning how to build stuff with web, and like, what's the advice you say? Oh, start with React and download these 500 megs of includes and frameworks just to write hello world, or are you going to go into Notepad and write hello world by hand? And I don't actually know which way is better. Obviously, I can speak for what worked for me, but um, yeah, I think there's way more complexity and way more choices and way more sort of paths to kind of understanding these things. And I think some people working with those frameworks don't understand any of the abstractions, below the surface. And I think sometimes that's an issue, but that's again a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad this podcast isn't about career advice, or it would just be one line: Mark has no idea what to tell you.
At least I'm honest about it, though.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, good luck, sir. But this podcast is about what makes people proud. I'm curious, what's made you most proud of in your career so far?
Well, I think you know one of them, obviously, which was when I was at Optimizely, doing product strategy work, and one of the big tasks was acquiring Welcome Software. I also did some M&A at Sitecore as well, and to me that is what I feel most suited towards, and also what I was proudest of, because in both the case of Optimizely acquiring Welcome and Sitecore acquiring Style Labs, there was a lot of moving pieces to that acquisition, right? And it's like, you're trying to fill portfolio gaps, and you're trying to look at corporate culture, and you're trying to look at architectural compatibility, and you're trying to look at, what additional opportunities this will fill. And I think to go back to the Optimizely example and Welcome Software, like that acquisition allowed Optimizely to really position themselves pretty differently as being something that's very marketing focused, very focused on content creators, and you know this, we were trying to fill that gap a little bit on the product side as far as content authoring experiences, and then that opportunity to acquire a content marketing platform came along, and it made a lot of sense. And going through that process was, I think, a lot of work. And this, there's a lot to it, but ultimately, I think you and I and the rest of the team can be pretty proud in that that was, I think, a pretty transformative acquisition for the company.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, obviously, I lived that same experience as you. And I think I've been a part of 19 or 20 acquisitions, and I've led six. And you and I had this conversation a lot where uh, I don't know how to categorize it, but there's a before, like identifying if something is the right thing. There's the during, the due diligence, and then there's the start, which is
Yeah.
when everybody else finds out. And we would talk, we talk about it. It's like you already ran a marathon, and then at the end of the marathon is when you actually start the next marathon. And it was, complicated. And I recall, I don't know what your experience in this area is, but I recall so many people saying, that's what I want to do. I want to do strategy. I want to be involved in M&A. And I think that like there's some allure to it for sure,
Mhm.
whether it's a part of the due diligence or the definition or whatever. I don't know if that's your same experience, that it like seems like it's a amazingly fun, interesting, which it is, but the work involved is so different than a day to day because you simultaneously have to do your day to day. I don't know if your experience is the same.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think also strategy is one of those things that's kind of like graphic design. Like everybody thinks that they
Mm.
can do it. And I think, like, using Ratatouille as an example, like, everybody can do it, but there's a lot more to it than I think a lot of people think. um, you go back to, again, what was successful, and there is a lot of thinking that goes into, okay, how is this filling the gap in the narrative? How is this filling the gap in the product? How are we ensuring that there's good cultural compatibility? Like there is a lot of thinking that goes on. It's kind of like an iceberg, right? Like everybody sees that sort of tip and thinks, okay, that's exciting. You get to do that thing. You get to meet a new team. You get to work on the integration afterwards. But below that surface, there's so much more thinking that gets into it. And to your point about successful acquisitions versus unsuccessful ones, there's a lot of unsuccessful ones as well that you don't hear about. And some of them get pretty far along, and there's a lot of uh, you know fallout from that the further along that you get, and if it doesn't go well. And so, yeah, it's I think it's one of those things, like, looking at lawyers on TV shows, like, oh, especially in the US, like big lawyer TV shows, and it's very sexy. And then in reality, it's just a bunch of grind. You're sitting at a desk, you're running through financial scenarios, you're, trying to tease out where, how you think this is going to fit in, how to communicate it internally to product teams. And, especially those that might have been working on something that's complementary. How do you position that and not, have them feel upset by, the new team potentially coming in and overlapping with their work? Like,
Yeah.
it's a big puzzle, and it is interesting, and I really really enjoy the puzzle. But I think most people don't realize how complicated it is under the hood.
Yeah, and some of the things that surprised me. I mean, there definitely is like a template, like you talking about, like everything from culture to product fit to messaging to competition. Like there is a template. There's a scorecard ish, um, but what always surprised me was the assumption from other folks, and for me, before I led a bunch, was that there is an opportunity to be more scientific about it, but there's anything but science. And I think that that's where the strategy overlay certainly comes in, where strategy is, probably more art than science. And you kind of have to look at it from a bunch of different angles. I think a great example is, what do you do with the teams? Do you integrate them? Do you keep them separate? what do you do with the sales teams? Are they allowed to sell this individually or not? And I think in the 6 that I led, I think we did like 6 variations because the situation determined something. And at the end, it ended up being integrated entirely. But for some of those, couldn't, because they didn't want to lose their culture and they kind of had to be incrementally involved. I think that's what we did with Welcome. But yeah, I think that the expectation of it being maybe more scientific than it really is was always interesting to me.
Well, and I think there's another thing that you've sort of hit on, which is really key, is that I think most people think, oh, you're acquiring a product. And like, yes, you are in a sense, but really you're acquiring the people. And if you end up acquiring the product and not keeping them happy and not keeping your internal folks happy, then a whole bunch of people are going to leave, and that will basically start to diminish the value of the product. If you can't support it, if you can't implement it, if you can't continue to develop it, then regardless of sort of the fit in the portfolio and some technical compatibility, if the people side of things isn't done well, then it starts to fall apart.
Yeah, and it's in some you're kept at arm's length through the banker. With Welcome, there was clear understanding that Shafkat, who was the CEO and at the time, his view as well was like, we got to get to know the teams and individuals, and we spent a lot of time. Whereas with like the Optimizely acquisition, there was we met 5 people
Yeah.
probably, and there was total arm's length entirely through a banker. And I definitely have some views and opinions on the valuation side of spending more time and getting to know people versus just through bankers. But that's for different, yet our third different podcast that we've invented here.
Yes.
But yeah, that people side is super interesting, and especially during like COVID, it was hard for 2-dimensional. And luckily at that point, we were able to spend some more time, with them. I don't know, from another acquisition, maybe Style Labs or whatever, whatever other ones you were involved in. And actually we did there were some that we were involved in that never came to fruition, that we obviously won't talk about the names. But you maybe talk a little bit about the differing experiences, maybe Welcome to Style Labs, from that process that you were involved in.
Yeah, Style Labs was pretty similar in a lot of ways as well. We had good executive engagement, and same thing, like excellent technology, excellent team. I think the one difference about Style Labs, which is now Sitecore Content Hub, for anybody playing along at home, I think the one big difference was in both cases, from a product strategy perspective, we saw the acquisition as being pretty transformative. Like, Optimizely can acquire Welcome and then all of a sudden talk about themselves and the entire company in a very different light. And I think that did happen well with Optimizely, right? Like, you bring in this technology, really get some of the thinking along with the technology, and rebrand along the lines of focusing on marketers and talking about Optimizely One as a system for marketers. And like in that case, you're not just acquiring tech in a company, you're kind of using that to transform your entire value proposition. And Optimizely did that really well. I think Sitecore missed a step on the capitalization of that. I think we definitely, within the product team and the evaluation team, saw Style Labs as being potentially transformative, right? They were cloud first. They had a really nice philosophy for how they worked under the hood with a graph database. And even though they were a digital asset management system, and we were sort of checking the box to say Sitecore now has a DAM, so we can compete against Adobe. I think some folks just saw it as that. It's like, right, we now have this, we've filled in this gap in our portfolio, so now we can compete against Adobe, which has a DAM. I think other folks saw it as potentially more transformative, and being able to accelerate Sitecore's journey to getting more cloud first. And ultimately that didn't happen to the same extent that we would have liked.
Yeah.
I think Sitecore is now playing catch up. Roger Connolly, who was at at Style Labs at the time. He's now head of product for all of Sitecore. And Sitecore is kind of doing the same with some of the other acquisitions. They'd acquired Boxever, and now the CEO of Boxever is the CEO of all of Sitecore. So I think they've kind of learned over time, like, yeah, you're not just acquiring a thing to go on a shelf to fit a box on an RFP. Like, when you're doing that acquisition, you want to make sure that you're getting some additional synergy from that as well, either internally in terms of culture, or externally in terms of how you position, and ideally both, right?
Yep. No, that makes sense. I mean, there's so many nuances to all of those things, and a lot of the things are like what if
Yeah.
scenarios, like, and you can't ever necessarily answer that. But in the due diligence, you have to kind of play that out. I'm going to change gears on you for just a moment. We have a mutual ex-colleague, mutual current friend, Dean Barker, who just became a grandfather. I'm curious if you were to give advice to our friend. How much cheese should he feed the newborn?
I have no idea. I don't have kids, and I do love cheese too much. So I think the answer that I would give is probably a much higher figure than any health professional would recommend.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes, I think I know the answer to it, which is like nothing for a little
Zero?
while.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who knows? And I didn't realize that you too were a cheese fan, and I get cravings. I'm like, we got to get a charcuterie board. And how disappointing is it when you show up and there's like one piece of cheese? I'm like, we just need to leave, right? And so Dean and his blog, but that's I guess it makes sense because on his blog or whatever he has for his cheese, a lot of them are with you.
Yeah. I was a real contributor to his charcuterie and cheese board blog for a very long time. Also during COVID, my wife and I were basically having like charcuterie Fridays, and
Mm.
our 10th wedding anniversary unfortunately was in the thick of COVID, and basically it was the two of us by ourselves on our screened-in porch with a very lovely charcuterie. But it was definitely a little bittersweet, because obviously we couldn't go out and celebrate. Restaurants were closed. But I think that is on Dean's blog, the very nice charcuterie for our 10th wedding anniversary.
Nice, nice. Oh, he was there, or did he just you
No,
wrote it?
no, I took a picture of it and sent it to him. This
Yeah,
goes on his
during
wall.
COVID, we couldn't see anybody, but we
Yeah,
invited Dean to our porch.
yes, he was
Yes,
there in spirit.
yes. All right, one last question, and this is my self-serving question. What is your favorite book or movie or TV show that you've read or watched in like the last year?
Uh, let's see. I've been watching a lot of comfort programming, and both on the book side and on the TV show side. And what I mean by that is TV that's very, very predictable. So that's a lot of like British procedural, like detective procedurals. And these are always hilarious because often they're set in a small town. There's one, so there's I've been watching Lewis, Inspector Lewis, which is basically a reprise of Inspector Morse. And I think the guy's been playing the same character for like 30 years, and it's same format. One murder in Act One, one murder in Act Two, and Act Three solves it. It's completely mindless, but it's a good escape. And then and then there's another version of that called Death in Paradise, which is
Hmm.
funny because it's a British detective on a British slash French island in the Caribbean, and we call it Murder Island because there's probably only like a couple thousand people, and yet every week there's a murder. Like literally, it's yeah, worse than the downtown, South Chicago. So we watched that, and then on the book side, same thing. Ian Rankin, he's a Scottish, mystery crime writer, and new book every couple of years. Louise Penny, same thing. She's a Canadian equivalent. Funny story, and circling back to why I love London. When I was first there for work, literally I was in Canary Wharf, and right in the building downstairs, Ian Rankin was giving a book signing. So that was one of the first books I got signed. And then obviously now, a lot of the stores along Piccadilly, so Hatchard's and Goldsboro Books in Cecil Court, they basically have authors just coming in and signing a ton of books. So you can buy signed first editions. So I got a Louise Penny signed first edition of her latest for my mother-in-law. So I really miss that. That's one of my favorite things about London, is just there's always there's always your favorite bands playing. There's always your favorite authors in town. Samuel Johnson sort of famously said, "If you're tired of London, you're tired of life itself." And yeah, that's totally true. And so I had to throw that in on the subject of books, because that was a long-standing interest of mine.
It sounds like you should have really been or you are an honorary Brit. All of the elements of your life incorporate something about British.
Most Canadians are, right. This is a Canadian flag from 1870. A lot of our government process is the same. We have the same funny looking individual on our money. So we would get a lot of BBC shows on the CBC.
That's true. Yeah.
It's not a huge stretch culturally to lean into. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. This is how my family communicates in our house. Or we were just on a plane and my 13-year-old turned around as we land, and we all go like this, because most Americans don't know that that's not necessarily a good thing. So I too feel like I should have been, and my entire family, we feel like we are British. And so yeah, maybe that's why we get along so well. You are actually one removed. I'm many removed. So yes. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you joining. It's great catching up with you. And don't hurt yourself when you're being an outdoorsman, or you're trying to put something together. I know you hurt yourself kind of often, but try not to in the near future.
You're making it sound like I was injuring myself on a regular basis. I was just sore. It was just a lot of lifting. That's all it was.
I mean, it'd been funny if you picked up your hand and I still have 3 fingers.
I have all my fingers. and no extras, so it's not very bad.
All right, man. It was great catching up with you.
All right, you too.
What makes you proud? Stay positive when the wind is in your face. Treating people with respect, treating people with dignity. Be proud of what you've done.